The airport was louder than anything Aisha had ever experienced. People rushed in every direction, screens blinked with strange codes and numbers, and announcements echoed through the huge hall. For others, it was a normal day of travel. For Aisha, it felt like stepping into another world. She clutched her small handbag tightly against her chest, her knuckles white from nervousness. This was her first flight ever. Back in her small hometown, she had only seen airplanes flying high in the sky, like silver birds that disappeared into the clouds. Never once had she imagined she would sit inside one. Her family had cried when she left. They had given her blessings, prayers, and a few coins hidden inside her scarf. But deep inside, Aisha felt fear. What if she did something wrong? What if she didn't understand the rules? What if people laughed at her? As she slowly walked through the long shiny corridors, she tried to copy others. She saw a man taking out his passport confidently, so she took hers out too. She saw a woman placing her bag on a moving belt, so she did the same, though her hands trembled. Every little step felt like a test, and she prayed she would not fail. When she finally reached the boarding gate, her heart was beating so fast she thought others might hear it. People stood in a line, showing their tickets to the staff. Aisha joined the line quietly, her eyes wide, her lips whispering a small prayer. The moment came. She handed her ticket to the lady at the gate. The lady smiled politely, scanned it, and said, "Have a safe flight." Safe flight. The words gave her a small comfort, but also reminded her that this huge machine would soon fly high above the ground. As she stepped inside the plane, her breath caught. The seats, the narrow aisle, the smell of air freshener, everything felt unreal. People were arranging their bags in the overhead compartments, pressing buttons, and talking casually as if it was nothing. For Aisha, it was everything. She looked at her seat number, carefully reading it again and again. Row 17, Seat A. She found it by the window. Slowly, she sat down, clutching her handbag. But then something happened. In the rush of boarding, she had taken a small black cabin bag from the luggage shelf, thinking it was hers. It looked almost the same, simple, black, with a tag she hadn't checked. She placed it carefully near her feet, believing it was her own. She had no idea this small mistake would change everything. Her hands shook as she tried to fasten the seat belt. She struggled, pulling it the wrong way, until a kind old woman beside her leaned over and helped. "First time flying?" the woman asked gently. Aisha gave a small embarrassed smile. "Yes." The woman patted her hand. "Don't worry. The first time is always scary, but you'll be fine." The plane doors closed. Aisha's heart sank. She felt trapped inside a metal bird that was about to fly. The engines roared, and her hands tightened on the armrest. She whispered prayers under her breath, her lips moving quickly. The plane began to move, faster and faster, until suddenly, it lifted. Aisha's stomach turned upside down. She gripped the bag at her feet as if holding on to life itself. The world outside the window shrank. Houses became dots, cars became toys, and soon the clouds surrounded her. Her fear was mixed with wonder. She had never seen the world from this high. The clouds looked soft, like cotton, and the sun glowed brighter than ever. For a moment, she forgot her fear and simply stared. But the peace didn't last long. A sudden shake of the plane made her gasp. Turbulence. The seatbelt sign blinked, and the crew calmly asked everyone to remain seated. Aisha's heart raced again. She bent down, clutching the black bag tightly, almost hugging it. Her breath was shallow, her eyes wet with tears. She whispered, "Please, God, keep me safe." To distract herself, she slowly opened the bag, just a little. Maybe looking at her things would calm her down. But what she saw inside was not hers. Her eyes widened. Instead of her simple clothes and snacks, the bag contained files, papers, and a golden pen engraved with strange initials. Beneath the papers, she noticed an envelope thick with documents, numbers, and stamps she couldn't understand. Her breath caught. This was not her bag. She quickly closed it, her mind spinning. If this was not hers, then whose was it? She looked around nervously. Passengers were busy reading, sleeping, or listening to music. Nobody seemed to notice. But one man, a few rows away, was standing, his sharp eyes scanning the cabin as if searching for something important. His tall figure, his calm but powerful presence, it was impossible not to notice him. Aisha's hands tightened on the bag. A strange chill ran down her spine. She didn't know it yet, but the mistake she made, the bag she held, was not just anyone's. It belonged to someone who could change her life forever. Aisha sat frozen in her seat, her trembling hands resting on the mysterious black bag. Her mind spun with questions. If this wasn't her bag, then where was hers? Who did this bag belong to? She swallowed hard, trying to calm herself. Maybe it's just another passenger's, maybe I can return it quietly after the flight. But deep inside, she knew something was not ordinary about it. The turbulence ended, and the cabin grew quieter. The old woman beside her closed her eyes to rest. Aisha looked around carefully, making sure no one was watching, then bent down and unzipped the bag again. The papers inside were neatly arranged, tied with a golden clip. She pulled one out. The words on it were difficult to understand, but the numbers shocked her. Millions, billions, written again and again. She gasped softly. These were not normal papers. They were business contracts, property deals, and bank documents, things far beyond her simple life. And then she noticed something else, a small black notebook with a golden emblem. On the first page, written in neat handwriting, was a name. Rayan Karim. Aisha's heart skipped a beat. The name sounded familiar. She had heard it once before, in the news on television at a neighbor's house. A billionaire businessman. A man whose companies were spread across the country. A man powerful enough that everyone knew his name. Her fingers went cold. She looked up quickly, scanning the rows of passengers. Her eyes landed on him, the tall man she had noticed earlier, standing just a few rows away, speaking to a flight attendant. His face was calm but serious, his presence strong enough that people automatically moved aside for him. She realized with a jolt, this was his bag. Her pulse raced faster. What if he discovered she had it? Would he think she had stolen it? Would he get her arrested? She imagined police waiting at the airport, handcuffs clicking around her wrists, her family crying back home. Fear filled her chest like fire. She quickly zipped the bag shut and pushed it gently under her seat, her breath shaking. She whispered to herself, "Don't panic. Just stay quiet. Return it later. No one will know." But it wasn't so easy. Aisha could feel his eyes scanning the cabin. His expression showed he was looking for something. Her palms grew sweaty. She bent her head low, pretending to look out the window. The flight attendant shook her head at him, as if saying the missing item couldn't be found yet. He returned to his seat, only 3 rows ahead of Aisha. From the corner of her eye, she watched him sit down, his sharp jawline tense, his hands clasped together in silence. The more she tried not to look, the more she noticed him. He wasn't like the other rich men she had seen in movies or magazines. His clothes were simple yet elegant, his watch shining faintly under the cabin lights. Even sitting quietly, his presence felt heavy, like a leader who didn't need to speak to command respect. Aisha bit her lip. Why did fate choose her, of all people, to grab his bag? She closed her eyes, trying to calm her pounding heart. But her mind wouldn't stop. What if there was more inside? What if this bag carried secrets nobody else was meant to see? Hours passed slowly. Passengers ordered tea, coffee, and snacks. Some laughed, others slept. Aisha couldn't eat, couldn't rest. She kept imagining him standing up again, pointing at her, shouting in front of everyone. At one point, she reached down and touched the bag, whispering, "I'll give it back. I promise." But her whisper felt weak in the roar of the engines. Her thoughts returned to home. Back in her town, her family believed she was safe and strong. If they knew the truth, that she was sitting in the clouds with a billionaire's bag at her feet, they would never believe it. Suddenly, the plane shook again. Passengers gasped, some gripping their seats. The captain's voice came over the speaker, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We are facing light turbulence." But it didn't feel light to Aisha. Her stomach dropped, her heart raced. She grabbed the bag again, hugging it tightly like a shield. She couldn't explain why, but holding it gave her a strange sense of comfort, as if this mistake had tied her fate to something bigger than herself. And then, in that moment of fear, she made a decision. She would return the bag to him. Not after landing, not secretly, but here, inside the plane. Before anyone else could suspect her. But as she prepared to stand, something unexpected happened. Rayan Karim rose from his seat again. This time, his sharp eyes scanned the rows more carefully. His gaze stopped, for just a second, on Aisha. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing, as if he sensed something. Aisha clutched the bag tighter under her seat, her face pale. She didn't know it yet, but their first meeting was about to happen. And it would not be ordinary. The cabin lights were dim now. Most passengers had settled into their seats, some reading, some sleeping. But Aisha couldn't close her eyes, not even for a second. Her heart had been racing ever since she realized the truth about the black bag. And now, her greatest fear was unfolding. Rayan Karim, the billionaire himself, had stood again. His tall figure moved slowly down the aisle, his sharp eyes scanning each row. There was no panic in his face, no anger, only a calm focus that somehow felt more terrifying than shouting. He was searching, and Aisha knew exactly what he was looking for. She bent her head low, pretending to adjust her scarf. But her hands were trembling. The bag under her feet suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 kilos. Step by step, he moved closer. The soft sound of his polished shoes on the floor echoed in her ears louder than the airplane engines. Her throat went dry. When he reached her row, she prayed he would pass by. But he stopped. For a second, Aisha didn't breathe. She kept her eyes glued to the window, pretending to admire the night sky. But she could feel his gaze, heavy and sharp, resting on her. "Excuse me," his voice was deep, calm, and commanding. "The bag under your seat. Is it yours?" The words cut through her like a knife. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The old woman beside her stirred in her sleep, unaware of the tension. Aisha's fingers clutched the armrest. Finally, in a shaky voice, she whispered, I thought it was mine." Rayan raised an eyebrow. He crouched slightly, his eyes now at her level. Up close, his presence was even stronger. His dark eyes searched her face, not with anger, but with a strange intensity, as if trying to read her soul. "You thought?" His tone was quiet, but it carried weight. "Did you open it?" Aisha's breath caught. For a moment, she thought of lying, saying no. But something in his eyes made her feel she couldn't. They were not the eyes of a man easily fooled. Slowly, she nodded. "Just a little. I didn't mean to." For a long second, silence stretched between them. She expected him to shout, to call the flight attendants, to accuse her. Instead, something unexpected happened. Rayan's lips curved into the faintest smile. Not warm, not amused, but thoughtful. "At least you're honest," he murmured. Her eyes widened. She didn't know what to say. Rayan straightened, but his eyes didn't leave hers. "That bag is very important," he said softly. "Most people would have kept it closed, pretended they didn't see anything. But you admitted it. Do you realize what that means?" Aisha shook her head quickly, her heart pounding. She whispered, "Please believe me. I didn't want to take it. It was a mistake. I was scared." For a moment, his gaze softened. He could see the fear in her trembling hands, the innocence in her voice. She wasn't a thief. She was just lost. Then, without warning, the plane jolted violently. Gasps and cries filled the cabin as turbulence shook the seats. The lights flickered, luggage rattled above. Aisha let out a small scream and instinctively grabbed the bag again, clutching it tightly against her chest. Rayan's eyes stayed on her. Even in the chaos, he leaned closer, his voice calm. "Don't be afraid. It will pass." Her breathing was heavy, her eyes wet with tears. "I can't. I've never flown before," she confessed, almost choking on the words. Rayan's hand moved calmly, fastening her seatbelt tighter and adjusting the oxygen mask that had dropped near her head. His movements were steady, confident, the hands of a man who was not easily shaken. "It's just the air currents," he said quietly, his tone almost soothing. "You'll be fine. Trust me." Aisha looked at him through teary eyes. She had no reason to trust him. He was a stranger, a billionaire whose world was nothing like hers. And yet, in that moment, his calm voice was the only anchor keeping her from drowning in fear. The turbulence slowly eased. The cabin grew quieter again, though passengers still whispered nervously. Rayan straightened, his eyes still on her. "See? It's over." Aisha nodded weakly, wiping her tears. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but her chest felt lighter. She had survived the moment, thanks to him. She pushed the bag gently toward him. "Here, it's yours." "I'm sorry." But to her surprise, he didn't take it. He simply looked at her and said, "Keep it with you for now. I'll collect it later." Her mouth fell open. "But, it's important, isn't it? What if something happens to it?" He studied her face for a moment, then said quietly, "If it's with you, I know it's safe." Her heart skipped. She didn't understand. Why would a billionaire trust her, a nervous, poor girl on her first flight, with something so valuable? Rayan gave her one last look, then turned and walked back to his seat. But Aisha could still feel the weight of his words. She sat frozen, the bag on her lap, her mind spinning. What did he mean? Why trust her? Little did she know, this was only the beginning. The cabin was calmer now, but Aisha's heart was not. She sat frozen in her seat, clutching the black bag to her chest. Rayan's words still echoed in her mind. "If it's with you, I know it's safe." Why would a man like him trust her? She was no one, just a girl taking her first flight, trembling at every sound. And yet, his eyes, his calm voice, had carried a weight she couldn't forget. She dared to glance toward him. He was back in his seat, his expression unreadable, staring ahead as if deep in thought. Passengers whispered his name, some sneaking glances at him, but he ignored them all. Aisha lowered her eyes quickly, afraid he might catch her looking. But inside, her thoughts wouldn't stop. She felt like she had been pulled into a world she didn't belong to. The hum of the engines filled the silence. Some passengers were sleeping, others chatting softly. For a short while, everything seemed normal. Aisha even allowed herself to relax a little, resting her cheek against the window. And then, without warning, the plane dropped. Screams filled the air as the cabin shook violently. Trays rattled, cups spilled, luggage thudded against the compartments above. The lights flickered, then dimmed. The oxygen masks fell with a sudden snap, dangling in front of shocked faces. Aisha gasped, clutching the bag so tightly her fingers hurt. Her whole body froze with fear. She had never felt anything like this. The plane jolted up, then down again, making her stomach twist painfully. Passengers cried, some shouted prayers, others clung to each other. The old woman beside Aisha held her arm tightly, whispering, "It will be okay, child. It will be okay." But her own voice shook with fear. Aisha's breaths came fast and shallow. Her chest felt tight, her eyes blurred with tears. "We're going to fall," she whispered, her voice breaking. And then, through the chaos, Rayan appeared again. He moved calmly, almost against the storm around them, making his way to her row. While others panicked, his face remained steady, his steps strong. He bent down quickly, pulling the oxygen mask over her face. "Breathe," he instructed firmly, his deep voice cutting through the noise. "Slowly. Just breathe." Aisha obeyed, though her body shook uncontrollably. The air from the mask was cold, but it gave her lungs relief. Her wide, terrified eyes locked onto his. "I can't," she cried weakly. "I can't do this. I've never—" "Yes, you can," he interrupted, his tone calm but strong. "Listen to me. Look at me. Don't look anywhere else." And so, she did. In that terrifying moment, when the plane felt like it could fall apart, she focused only on him, his steady gaze, his calm voice. It was as if the storm around her didn't exist when he spoke. The plane shook again, harder this time. A tray flew from someone's hands, crashing to the floor. Passengers screamed louder. Aisha instinctively reached out, and before she knew it, her hand had gripped Rayan's sleeve tightly. She expected him to pull away. But he didn't. Instead, he placed his other hand gently over hers, grounding her, steadying her trembling fingers. "Hold on," he said softly. "It will pass." Seconds felt like hours. The plane rocked, dipped, and trembled. Every moment was filled with fear. But through it all, Aisha's eyes stayed on Rayyan. And slowly, she realized something: he wasn't afraid. His calmness was not just for himself, it was for her too. Finally, after what felt like forever, the turbulence began to ease. The cabin grew steadier, the cries softened, and the plane leveled. The lights brightened again, and the captain's voice came over the speaker, assuring everyone they were safe. A collective sigh filled the cabin. Some passengers clapped nervously, others wiped their tears. Aisha, still breathing through the mask, loosened her grip on his sleeve. Her hand fell back to her lap, trembling. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but her chest slowly calmed. Rayyan looked at her for a long moment. His eyes, usually sharp and distant, now carried a strange softness. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. She shook her head, her voice breaking. "No. I was so scared." "Fear is normal," he replied. "But courage is what you just showed. You faced it." Aisha lowered her eyes, unable to speak. Her heart was still racing, but not just from fear anymore. Something about his words, his presence, had touched her deeply. He reached down, adjusting the bag still clutched against her chest. "Don't worry about this," he added softly. "It's safe with you." Before she could reply, he returned to his seat. But Aisha sat frozen, staring at the bag in her lap. His words echoed in her mind, mixing with the memory of his steady eyes and calm voice. She realized something she couldn't explain. In that moment of chaos, when the whole plane had felt like it would break apart, he had given her something she never had before: trust. And though the flight had returned to calm, her heart had only just begun its storm. The plane had calmed, but Aisha's heart had not. She sat quietly, her fingers still trembling, the black bag resting safely on her lap. The roar of the turbulence was gone, replaced by soft murmurs of passengers trying to recover. But in Aisha's chest, a storm still lingered. She glanced toward Rayyan's seat. He was sitting upright, calm as ever, his face unreadable. He looked like a man who was used to chaos, who had seen storms before and never bent under them. But she couldn't forget the way he had looked at her. The way his hand had steadied hers. The way his voice had calmed her when she thought her life would end. Her eyes dropped to the bag again. It seemed ordinary from the outside, just like any other piece of luggage. Yet inside was a world she couldn't understand. Papers, documents, numbers far too big for her imagination. She hesitated, then slowly unzipped it again. Curiosity, mixed with fear, pulled her in. She carefully pulled out a thin file. Her eyes scanned the words, though many were too difficult for her. She saw names of companies, contracts worth millions, properties in different countries. It was like peeking into another universe, one made of power and wealth, far away from her small life. And then she noticed a folded envelope tucked in the corner. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was not money, not contracts, but a letter. The handwriting was neat, strong, almost elegant. She began to read. "To myself. Even with everything I own, I feel nothing. These papers prove my wealth, but they cannot fill the silence of my nights. I trust no one. Everyone around me wants something: money, power, status. Not one person has looked at me without expectation." Aisha's eyes widened. She read on, her breath catching at every line. "I leave this note in my bag as a reminder. Wealth can buy the world, but it cannot buy trust. It cannot buy honesty. It cannot buy a heart that is true." Her hands trembled. This wasn't a business paper. This was a confession, a glimpse into the heart of a man the world saw as untouchable. She looked up, her eyes finding Rayyan again. He was staring ahead, his jaw set, as if lost in thought. He looked powerful, yes, but suddenly, through this letter, she saw something else. Loneliness. Her chest tightened. She thought of her own life, of how invisible she often felt, how she prayed for someone to see her for who she was. And here was a man with everything, yet writing about emptiness. For the first time, she didn't see a billionaire. She saw a human being. The old woman beside her stirred, waking slowly. "Are you all right, child?" she asked softly. Aisha quickly folded the letter back, hiding it inside the file. She gave a small nod. Yes, just a little nervous. But inside, her heart was racing with new emotions. She wanted to return the bag, to tell him she had read the letter, to say something, anything. But how could she? What if he thought she had invaded his privacy? Minutes passed. The cabin lights dimmed for night, and most passengers drifted into uneasy sleep. Aisha sat awake, staring at the bag, her mind restless. Finally, she gathered courage. She stood slowly, clutching the bag, and walked down the aisle toward his seat. Her legs felt weak, her heart thundering. Rayan looked up as her shadow fell over him. His sharp eyes softened slightly when he saw her holding the bag. I think this is yours, she whispered, her voice unsteady. He studied her for a moment, then gestured for her to sit in the empty seat beside him. She hesitated, then slowly lowered herself. You read it, didn't you? He asked quietly, his tone calm but certain. Her breath caught. She lowered her head in shame. I didn't mean to. I was scared. I thought maybe if I knew whose bag it was, I could return it. Instead of anger, Rayan let out a faint sigh. Most people would have stolen from it. You didn't. And now, you know something about me that no one else does. Aisha's eyes widened. But why write such things? You're so rich, so powerful. People respect you. He looked away, his gaze lost in the dark window. His voice was low, almost bitter. Respect? No. They fear me. They admire my money, not me. Tell me, girl, if tomorrow I had nothing, how many would still stay? Aisha had no answer. She simply stared at him, her chest heavy with emotions she couldn't name. For the first time, he turned to her fully. His eyes, though tired, carried a spark of curiosity. But you look at me differently. You're afraid, yes. But not of me. You're honest. And honesty is the rarest thing I've ever found. Her cheeks burned. She lowered her eyes, whispering, I didn't do anything special. But he shook his head. You did. You reminded me what truth feels like. They sat in silence, the hum of the plane filling the space between them. For Aisha, it felt unreal, sitting beside a billionaire, holding his secrets in her heart. For Rayan, it felt unusual, speaking so openly to a stranger he had only just met. Neither of them realized it yet, but the wrong bag had carried more than just papers. It had carried the beginning of something unforgettable. The night grew quieter inside the plane. Most passengers were asleep now, their faces calm after the storm had passed. Only a few lights glowed across the cabin. But Aisha could not sleep. She sat beside Rayan, her mind racing. The black bag was no longer just an object. It had shown her a side of him that no one else saw, a lonely man hidden beneath the mask of wealth and power. Her hands rested in her lap, fidgeting nervously. She didn't know why she had stayed beside him. Perhaps it was because something about his presence made her feel safe, even when the world shook. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in her life, someone like him had looked at her, not as invisible, but as real. Rayan leaned back in his seat, his eyes half closed, but she could tell he wasn't asleep. His voice broke the silence, low and steady. You remind me of something I lost a long time ago, he said. Aisha turned, surprised. What do you mean? He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. Simplicity. Honesty. People used to look at me as a person. Now, they only see money. Power. They want something. But you don't. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say something, but the words felt too heavy. So she simply whispered, I'm just me. A faint smile touched his lips. And that is enough. The plane began to descend slowly, the captain's voice announcing they would soon land. Passengers stirred, fastening seatbelts, preparing for arrival. Aisha felt her chest tighten. The journey was almost over. And with it, this strange connection she had never expected. She glanced at Rayan, wondering if she would ever see him again. People like him lived in a world far away from hers. Once they landed, he would walk away to luxury cars, security, and boardrooms. She would walk away into her ordinary struggles. The thought made her heart ache. As the plane lowered, she gathered courage. When we land, she whispered softly, "You'll forget me." Rayan opened his eyes, looking at her sharply. "Forget you?" He shook his head slowly. "No. You're not someone I could forget." Her breath caught. She lowered her gaze quickly, afraid he might see the emotions in her eyes. The wheels touched the ground with a soft thud. The plane rolled across the runway, slowing as passengers clapped and cheered quietly. Relief filled the air. Aisha's chest tightened further. The journey had ended. But what about this fragile bond between them? The seatbelt sign turned off. People stood, reaching for bags, eager to leave. Aisha stayed seated, clutching her small purse. She didn't want to move. If she stood, it would be over. Rayan stood, reaching for his bag from the overhead compartment. But when he looked down at her, he didn't see just another passenger. He saw the girl who had held his secret, who had calmed his storm as much as he had calmed hers. He leaned closer, his voice low. "You said I would forget you. But listen carefully, I will not. You showed me something rare. And rare things are not forgotten." Her eyes filled with tears. She wanted to answer, but her voice failed her. He gently took the black bag from her lap, their fingers brushing for a second. Then, without another word, he turned and began to walk toward the exit. His tall figure moved with the calm strength she had seen all night. Aisha sat frozen. Around her, passengers rushed out, the cabin emptying quickly. She felt a strange hollowness in her chest, as if a piece of her had just walked away with him. The old woman beside her touched her arm gently. "Child, are you not leaving?" Aisha blinked, wiping her eyes. She forced a small smile. "Yes, I am." She gathered her things and slowly stepped out of the plane. The cool air of the airport touched her face. Crowds moved in every direction, voices echoed, luggage rolled across the floor. And then she saw him. Rayan was surrounded by men in suits, clearly his staff, waiting for him with respectful bows. He walked with them, his posture proud and confident. Yet for one fleeting moment, he turned his head, his eyes finding hers in the crowd. Time froze. He didn't smile, didn't wave. But his gaze held her for a second too long, deep and unforgettable. A silent promise passed between them. Then he turned away, disappearing into the sea of people, into the world that belonged to him alone. Aisha stood still, her heart heavy yet strangely full. She knew she might never see him again. But she also knew something had changed inside her. She had stepped on the plane as a nervous, invisible girl. She was stepping off as someone who had touched the heart of a billionaire, even if only for a moment. And for him, she had become the one passenger he could never forget.